Good morning. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It is June 30th and it's 9 a.m. and we will start our meeting with a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Bogue. Here. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good to see everybody. We have one item on our agenda this morning. That is docket number 2205-00106, the Orphan Well Mitigation Fee Enterprise Rulemaking. We will just sort of as a shot for the day, start with the director staff presentation, move into public comment. We then have party presentations, and then we have commissioner deliberations. With that, I think we're going to roll into the director staff presentation first. Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Give me a moment to get my presentation up and get going. All right, hopefully everyone can see that.
We can.
All right. Well, good morning, Commission and members of the public. Thank you. My name is Mimi Larson. I'm the Hearings and Regulatory Affairs Manager, and I'm going to be presenting to you this morning on staff's proposed revisions to Rule 205. By way of background, why we are here today. On May 10th, the legislature adopted Senate Bill 22-198, the Orphaned Oil and Gas Well Enterprise Bill. That bill provides a mechanism for the collection and remittance of the annual mitigation fee that this commission approved and adopted in the course of its financial assurance rulemaking, which was concluded in March of this year. On May 18th, staff noticed with the Secretary of State its proposed revisions to the 200 series to accommodate elements and revisions to rules to accommodate the creation of this enterprise board. So briefly, staff has proposed 2 new definitions that are necessary to accommodate the enterprise board. They're posted here on this slide, Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise and defining the enterprise board itself. I do just want to draw everyone's attention to the statutory sites that are included in these definitions. In our originally proposed rules, we had cited to 3460-132. We had that reference incorrect. It is in fact 3460-133. So if everyone would just note that, and we have proposed, we have fixed that in our latest revision to the draft rules, which was provided to the parties last night and is available in the e-filing system. So Rule 205 is where the majority of the edits to the rules are occurring. So we see here in Rule 205C2, staff are proposing language that again just incorporates the concept of the enterprise board and provides that the mitigation fee is going to be paid consistent with the procedures adopted by the enterprise board. We heard from several parties with respect to Rule 205C, C subsection 1 and 2. So the first party recommendation is with respect to subsection 2. Parties noted, rightly so, that at the time that the mitigation fee is first going to be paid in August of this year, it's unlikely that the enterprise board is going to have policies and procedures in place that are going to outline for operators how to remit that fee. So parties have recommended that we add language to Rule 205C2 that would clarify the COGCC will issue guidance as to how to remit that fee. Supports that. We don't have any issue with including that concept. However, we would just recommend that that concept be included in the SBP and not actually put in the rule language. Additionally, a party recommended that Rule 205C1 be amended to include language that would give guidance or direction to operators that are formed and come into our system after August 1st of this year as to how and when they should file their Form 1B. We appreciate the forward thinking and trying to look at perhaps addressing this issue. However, staff believes that this issue has already been addressed in our rules. Our Rule 205C3 subsection B provides that when all operators, regardless of when they come into our system, that they will pay the annual mitigation fee based upon the number of wells that they are operating as of December 31st. So if an operator comes into existence and registers with the Cogcc after August 1st of this year, they will still be subject to paying for any and all wells that they operate based upon the number of wells that are listed in their name as of December 31st of a given year. So staff doesn't believe that we need to make any changes to Rule 205C1 to accommodate that concept. Moving on, Rule 205C3, here, again, we are just proposing including language that recognizes the creation of the enterprise board and its authority to assess and set this fee. Thank you to some of our parties who have noted that we missed referencing or updating the reference to the annual mitigation fee. We still had annual registration fee in some of our references, and that has been corrected. Moving on to Rule 205C3, 205C3B, staff is proposing to remove the word approved here. As you will see, this rule currently reads that after a well is spud, the operator will pay an annual fee for the well until it's plugged and abandoned, subject to an approved Form 6. So just to provide a little background and information here, when an operator seeks to plug and abandon a well, they're going to file two forms. The first form is a Form 6 intent. That is the operator's intent to plug and abandon a certain well. In that Form 6, they need to detail the process by which they're going to plug and abandon a well. Staff reviews that and approves it. After the well has been plugged and abandoned, the operator then needs to come back and file its Form 6 subsequent. In that Form 6 subsequent, the operator is detailing the exact process that they use to plug and abandon the well. There's going to be third-party verification of data that is collected in the course of plugging and abandoning that well. It's quite a substantial filing. And again, it does include third-party verification. Currently, staff has a backlog on the Form 6 subsequents. We are about 1,000 forms behind that are in our queue that we have not yet been able to approve. We expect that number to increase as operators continue to go through their portfolio and identify wells that are old and that can be plugged and abandoned. So staff have recognized that if we were to keep the word approved in this well, we would have operators who are paying the annual mitigation fee on wells that have in fact been plugged and abandoned. We recognize that certainly it would be preferable if we would be able to have the Form 6 subsequent approved, concurrent with an operator submitting their annual mitigation fee. But at this time, it's just not feasible. And if we were to keep approved in the rule, we would run into a situation where our finance team are trying to reconcile at a later date wells that had been paid this mitigation fee and then would need to be either refunded or somehow credited to the operator. So staff are strongly in favor of removing approved. A party, Laramie County, has concerns with removing approved. They believe that there is the potential for misuse on the part of an operator to submit a Form 6 subsequent, and perhaps that Form 6 or I should say the plugging and abandonment of that well was not done in accordance with Cogcc rules, and there would need to be follow-up with the operator to correct whatever deficiencies staff may find in that Form 6. That is certainly a possibility, but staff feels that that is very rare, that we would run into a situation, either with an operator abusing this rule and perhaps submitting false Form 6 subsequents, or if in fact an operator does need to go back and correct the plugging, a portion of that plugging and abandonment of the well, that well is still plugged and abandoned. Even if there were some technical issues that need to be corrected, that well is still plugged and abandoned. And our staff would follow up with the operator and ensure that the well is plugged and abandoned in accordance with our rules. So with that, staff again is in support of removing approved from the rule. What you see here is, again, just cleanup to Rule 205C3D, again, incorporating the concept of the enterprise board. Moving on to Rule 205C4, again, cleanup and conforming language to acknowledge the creation of the enterprise board. Here we did have some party comments as to Rule 205C4. Again, Larimer County recommended that we would include language in this rule that would direct, or I should say authorize the director to use portions of the mitigation fee for expenditures related to the purpose of the Orphan Well program. Larimer County believes that the director should have greater authority to use the funds, perhaps for programs or services not directly within the Orphan Well program. Staff believes that, first of all, Senate Bill 22-198 was clear that the mitigation fee is to be used only for the plugging, reclaiming, and remediating of orphan wells in the state. We believe that the director certainly does have the authority to use the mitigation fee for services, staff, anything that is a part of that orphan well program. We do not believe, however, that we would be able to use those funds for employees or other services or other functions of this agency that fall outside the orphan well program. So at the end of the day, we don't feel that any additional revisions to this rule are necessary. Finally, I just want to address a few other proposals that came in. Several parties recommended that we include language that would require the enterprise board to conduct a stakeholder outreach prior to adjusting the mitigation fee. We certainly appreciate that feedback. We just want to note that staff in this commission, in our opinion, are unable to propose or adopt a rule that would bind the enterprise board to do something. Any rule regarding a stakeholder outreach or process would need to come from the enterprise board. And also to note that the enterprise board is likely subject to the Administrative Procedure Act, and that the Colorado Administrative Procedure Act provides that prior to engaging in a rulemaking, entities will engage in a stakeholder process. So staff feels that that stakeholder process is already captured in the APA and that the enterprise board would comply with that stakeholder outreach. So that's all I had. I'm happy to take any questions that commissioners have.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Appreciate the thorough review, the preparation by staff of the potential rules, the input that we had from our respective stakeholders, and your response to that. I think it's all well done. Do commissioners have questions for staff? All right, seeing no questions, we will continue onward with our docket. At this point, we now have public comment, and then that'll be followed by party presentations. We had 6 individuals sign up for public comment, starting with Robert Moran and then Bill Hawkins. So we will start to bring these folks to the panel. Third is Risa Wells, and then Joan Brehan, Michael Hampton, and Alexander Kelly. So let's first hear from Mr. Moran. Each one of you will have 3 minutes for public comment, and we've got a timer on the screen so that folks can be aware of their public comment time.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for your efforts to support the ongoing efforts in Colorado with the oil and gas industry while protecting our environment and our state's financial concerns. I really appreciate the work you do. I'm Bob Moraine. I have resided in Fort Collins for over 41 years. I worked for Hewlett Packard for 27 years and now own a small business. My wife is a registered nurse. Each year, our concerns over statewide economic conditions grow. Like everyone else, we have been affected by rising fuel costs. We pay more to drive to the grocery store. Businesses are charging more to deliver products to us. My wife drives a significant distance to work to address issues related to COVID-19. My business depends on the ability to source and ship products at reasonable rates. All of our friends and neighbors are feeling similar hits to their budgets due to escalating fuel and energy costs. And we know that the indirect costs are rising rapidly as companies we do business with must deal with their own fuel and energy expenses. Our state-funded programs, including education, depend on our state tax revenues, including severance taxes. I'm concerned that in addition to inflationary concerns, our state services will suffer if oil and gas development becomes too burdensome for interested developers. I have recently had conversations with an oil and gas developer, and he expressed his uncertainty to doing business in Colorado due to the uncertain regulatory environment. I've been encouraged by the Commission's recent efforts to recognize the vital nature of oil and gas development for our state and the national economy as a whole. The current draft proposals for dealing with protecting the state from the burden of abandoned wells appear to be far less punitive than previous drafts, focusing more on realistic means of protecting our environment while supporting important development. I am grateful for this final hearing to review and finalize this work. It is my hope that the Commission will finalize the good work you have done to date and send a message to all that oil and gas development is safe in Colorado. It is safe for the environment, it is safe for the workers, it is safe for our citizens, and it is safe for investors. Thank you again for allowing me to address you this morning.
Thank you for your public comment. We now will elevate Mr. Bill Hawkins if he's with us.
Mr. Hawkins, if you can hear us, we are ready for your public comment.
Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute. Hello, my name is Bill Hawkins and I live in Greeley. I first came out to Colorado in 1980 to work in the natural gas industry. I had 3 daughters, 2 of which reside along the Front Range. 2 of my son-in-laws also work in the oil and gas field. In those 40 years, I've seen many new regulations implemented, many of which were needed. Many of the smaller operators have left as they did not have the capital reserves to weather the ups and downs of the industry. This leaves the opportunities only for the larger operators. And the first thing a larger operator does when acquiring a smaller one is layoffs. This, of course, has the ripple effect of more economic downturn as the employees are forced to take lesser paying jobs. The current financial requirements seem to be adequate, especially when combined with the federal funds that were made available. Chevron has recently announced that they're closing a 2,000 person office in San Francisco as the state of California continues to regulate them, driving out industries where people work with their hands with additional requirements here in Colorado may force even more smaller operators to leave. Just expressing my concern that I think we should give the regulations that are in place a chance to play out instead of trying to change them every 6 months or so. And that is all I have to say, but thank you for your time and your concern.
Thank you for your public comment. We now will hear from Ms. Wells, Risa Wells.
Mr. Chair, I'm not finding Ms. Wells. I don't believe Ms. Amaro has brought her in. I don't see her in the meeting. We can move on to Joan Brown and then come back and keep looking for Ms. Wells.
Very good.
Hello.
Good morning. We can hear you.
Okay. Well, I had myself unmuted also. Anyway, I'm Joan Breon, 79 years old, a Colorado native. I've seen many, many changes in the years for Colorado, and gas and oil has been a big economic boom for Colorado and citizens, and many, many good blue collar working jobs. We've seen from freedom, smaller government, and overregulation creep up on us, and oil and gas is being financially harmed and overregulated, and they have worked very hard to see that we have clean air and clean water, and we all want that. And also when those companies go away, then the subsidiary businesses and all of the great jobs that go with them. And from a personal perspective, my husband and I, we've been living on gas and oil revenue for 22 years, and we've seen it go from comfortable, this was not ever Texas oil, to not buying groceries. And that affects us, but I also feel for the people, and you guys all know what happens at the grocery store and the gas pump. So this needs to be taken care of to where it's a win-win for everybody. And many want 100% electric right now or yesterday, and it's not feasible. It's not common sense. And even Elon Musk says we have to keep drilling because we're not ready for it. So I hope, that you will get this figured out to where it's a win-win for everybody. And I don't ever like to see pick and choose. One side wins, one side loses. It needs to work for everybody. And losing our energy independence has harmed our safety in the country. And so that's another consideration. So I thank you, and I want to thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for your commentary. Ms. Larson, we have Ms. Wells, Mr. Hampton, and Mr. Kelly left. Do you want to find one of those three for us?
We've been looking, and unfortunately, we don't have any of those commenters in the meeting at the moment. If you'd like, we can continue to look through them during the course of the morning. And if they come into the meeting, then we can hear their public comment.
I think that makes sense. We'll, always try to facilitate public comment, and it's early on a Thursday. There's a avalanche parade going on. There's all sorts of things. So perhaps we'll see them a little bit later. But we will continue with our business. In that regard, we would move to party presentations. And I see that you've got them allocated out, and they start with the Western and Rural Local Government Coalition.
Correct. And Mr. Nguyen will be speaking on behalf of WRLG. He needs just a moment or so to get his materials ready. So if we could take maybe just 2-minute pause to give Mr. Kirby, Mr. Nguyen a moment to get in, that would work.
That works fine. Everybody just hold your horses. We'll be ready as soon as we can.
We're bringing Mr. Nguyen in now.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning, Mr. Nguyen.
I apologize for the short delay there. You caught me, y'all are way ahead of schedule, which is great. Anyway, my name is Kirby Nguyen. I represent the Garfield County and the Western and Rural Local Government Coalition of 23 governments, 15 counties in Eastern and Western Colorado, and 8 municipalities in Western Colorado. We're very pleased and supportive of the rules pretty much as drafted. So I'm going to keep it very brief today. Appreciate it. I also appreciate staff's comments. They seem to address most everything that we were discussing in our rebuttal statement, where we questioned some of the additional proposals that some parties had made. So just in brief, like I say, we saw one party suggested just immediately changing the mitigation fee to $300 per well. We hope that you all do endeavor to stick with the current plan, which is to use a production-based volume and the current, and not try to encourage the board to immediately reconsider the 125 and 225. So appreciate that. We also, we didn't really see eye to eye. We couldn't really see eye to eye with the Larimer County proposals. Parties can't on one hand say, we need to up these fees because there's not enough money to deal with wells, and then at the same time say, let's really broaden and turn this into slush fund where you do things like research, reclamation activities, and that sort of thing. So research activities. So we didn't support that at all. That's really all that we had. We do support. We were one of the parties that did say we want to be sure that there's not necessarily rulemaking, but a stakeholder process, and particularly be informed by industry on any future updates that the enterprise board might do to the fee structure. And it sounds like from what your hearing officer said, hearing manager Larson said, that the APA does address that. I think this is the first rulemaking we've had where the state used the APA to prove out exactly what we were advocating for. So we appreciate that. Usually we're on the opposite sides of what the APA means. So I was glad to see that. That's all I have for you all today. I wish you well in your work. Appreciate it. I think staff's done a good job preparing this to implement Senate Bill 22-198.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. And it seems like we're going to have kind of a common theme in terms of some of the parties presenting about, the enterprise board having some form of stakeholder process when it does its fee review. And again, where the commission, the enterprise board is its own thing. And so I'm going to go ahead and just put my thoughts out there. I think it is appropriate for us to allow the enterprise board to establish its own method of doing business and for us not to be telling it how to do things. And so I will be on the enterprise board in the 4 to 4th category. And so I will already go ahead and sort of daylight the fact that, I think it makes sense for us to do a stakeholder process before we engage in fee thoughts. So I just wanted to go ahead and throw that out there because I think we're going to be hearing that as a commonality amongst folks. So thanks for your comments and for participating with us. We always appreciate the voice that you and your group brings to our rulemaking. So thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Nguyen? All right, you're off the hook.
Thank you all.
Evergreen Natural Resources.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Tricia Fanning and Chris McGowan are going to be presenting on behalf of Evergreen. And I'll wait till we get Ms. Fanning in. Good morning, Ms. Fanning. I understand you're also presenting on behalf of Magpie and Rampike Resources.
I am, yes.
Are you just going to speak now on behalf of all three entities?
I actually, Mr. McGowan had requested that I speak during the Rampike slot, so I'm amenable, but
That's what I had sent an email. Yeah, I was trying to raise my hand. Sorry, the chat was disabled. So we were gonna speak. We had sent an email to do it during Rampike at the end because we had Rampike, Magpike, and Rampike, Magpie, and Evergreen. If that works still.
That's fine. So you would like to speak at the end rather than now?
Yes, ma'am. If that's doable.
I'm comfortable with that. Mr. Chair, is everyone else okay with that? Oh, Jeff, Mr. Chair, you're muted.
We'll adjust the schedule and we'll bring up Evergreen, Magpie, and Rampike at the conclusion of the other testimony.
All right. We'll
Thank
say it for
you.
you, and we can bring in Koga.
See, we have with us Ms. Ryan.
Hi, good morning. Would you like me to go in advance of the other two parties?
I believe we have you ready now, if you're ready.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it. All right. Well, good morning, commissioners, staff, parties, and the public. I'm Julia Ryan with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, appearing today on behalf of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. Koga thanks you for the opportunity to present today, and particularly thanks staff for their work in preparing the draft rules. If rebuttal is permitted, I'd like to reserve 5 minutes for that purpose, please. Koga supports this rulemaking and recommended only a few changes in our filings. The first was that the rules adopted in this proceeding should specify that the initial mitigation fee submittal should be remitted pursuant to commission guidance, not procedures set forth by the enterprise board. And this change was acknowledged by staff earlier. And while Koga had recommended a rule change, Koga supports staff's treatment of this issue in the statement of basis, specific statutory authority and purpose, or SBP for short, and believes that adequately resolves this issue identified by Koga. Koga's second recommendation was to use consistent terminology to refer to the mitigation fee. And again, staff's latest draft also accomplishes that. So Koga thanks staff for these changes and supports them. Koga's third and final recommendation, which it renews today, is its suggestion for the SVP in this rulemaking to carry forward the commission's intent to monitor the mitigation fee's impact on the mill levy. Specifically, the statement of basis and purpose for the financial assurance rulemaking repeatedly acknowledged that the mitigation fee may render the mill levy too high because the mill levy, at least in part, contributes to commission funds that are used for addressing orphan wells. To the extent the mitigation fee duplicates one of the mill levy's many purposes, a reduction in the mill levy may make sense. And I want to emphasize that Koga is not asking the commission to reduce the mill levy or to adopt any rule or SBP language that requires the commission to reduce the mill levy. Koga only seeks for the commission to acknowledge that the fact that the enterprise board will now be setting the fee instead of the commission doesn't change the commission's prior assessment of the interplay between the two fees And so accordingly, that the commission will revisit the mill levy. It still intends to do that, and it'll consider whether modification of the mill levy is appropriate based on the mitigation fee amounts, the state's current and reasonably foreseeable orphan well inventory, as well as additional funding for orphan well mitigation, whether that's a federal grant or any other relevant information. The suggestion that the SBP carry forward some of the information from the financial assurance SBP was supported by many parties to this rulemaking, with I believe only Larimer County disagreeing with the suggestion. Larimer County rejected the suggestion, arguing that the SBP language is unnecessary because, in its view, because the SBP to the August 2020 mill levy rulemaking states that the COGC staff must provide quarterly financial updates due to, quote, the fluid nature of oil and gas production and price fluctuations, end quote. COGA respectfully disagrees with Larimer County that this general statement about quarterly financial updates adequately addresses COGA's issue. COGA's issue regards the interplay between the mitigation fee and the mill levy, but the mitigation fee is not mentioned as part of the 2020 mill levy SBP, and of course it couldn't have been because that was 2020, and it wasn't until the commission's recently concluded financial assurance rulemaking where the commission adopted the enterprise fee. Additionally, the 2020 mill levy SBP only requires quarterly financial updates and does not speak specifically to future rulemakings potentially modifying the mill levy. COGA continues to recommend that the SBP for this rulemaking acknowledge that the mill levy may need adjustments due to the mitigation fees. In fact, because a portion of the mill levy goes toward orphan well funding at present, the commission may need to lower the mill levy to properly balance its budget, which is a concern that the SBP for the financial assurance rules explicitly mentions. With this rulemaking being a narrow one with few parties, COGA does not have a great deal to say about other party positions, but while COGA has few convictions about other parties' positions, those that COGA does have are firmly held. And the first of these is that COGA strenuously opposes Larimer County's position that Form 6 subsequents must be approved by staff before wells with filed Form 6 subsequents are exempt from the mitigation fee. COGA objects to requiring that Form 6 subsequents must be approved on several grounds. Beginning with the most fundamental, it is unnecessary and unfair to require an operator who has plugged a well and submitted a Form 6 subsequent, which you heard earlier from staff's presentations, is a very detailed document with lots of information about the nature of the plugging as well as third-party verification. You'll have vendors coming in, things like that. And so it's unfair for them to pay a fee just because COGCC staff has not yet approved the Form 6 subsequent. COGA also points out that requiring Form 6 subsequents to be approved before exempting wells from the mitigation fee also has the unintended consequence of punishing operators with aggressive plugging programs. We all heard so much in the financial assurance rulemaking that a main thrust of the rules is to encourage operators to plug wells. Because there's a significant and growing backlog of submitted but unapproved Form 6 subsequents, an operator may find itself obligated to pay a considerable sum of money for wells that it has already responsibly plugged. Not only is this unnecessary and unfair, but it also leads to the operator having less funds available to continue plugging wells and to otherwise comply with the commission's very stringent rules. Another reason to reject Larimer County's position is that COGCC staff has already taken steps necessary to support its position that a Form 6 subsequent need not be approved for mitigation fee exemption. Specifically, the COGCC has undertaken painstaking web development work to create the new status of reported plugged. This is a new status for wells that have been plugged and for which the operator has filed a Form 6 subsequent, but it remains pending. COGC staff has consistently told operators in trainings and in multiple guidance documents that wells with this new status of reported plugged will be exempt from the mitigation fee. And also the scout cards, existing scout cards that you can pull off the COGCC website today reflect this reported plug status. So if you adopt Larimer County's position and take them up on their offer to strike the word approved, it would mean that the COGCC has the very real risk that it has to, well, it would have to redo its development work, but that carries the real risk that the commission would have to delay once more the financial assurance deadline for certain operators, because this reported plug status, this is built into all of the calculations for all of the financial assurance rules. So not just the mitigation fee we're talking about today, but also the plugging financial assurance under Rule 702. Finally, case law interpreting the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, prohibits agencies from reversing course without adequate explanation where an agency's position has given rise to legitimate reliance interests. Here, operators have been diligently planning for their initial Form 1B mitigation fee submittals, and they've been doing so against this backdrop of COGC staff consistently telling operators that wells for which Form 6 subsequents have been filed, even if they're not approved, will be exempt. Cogcc contends that it would be an abuse of discretion in violation of the APA for the commission to reverse course here when there's nothing in the record indicating that it would be reasonable or necessary to assess a mitigation fee on a plugged well. Larimer County apparently believes operators would attempt to game the system by filing Form 6 subsequents claiming that wells are plugged when they have not in fact been plugged. Cogcc does not believe this would be likely for several reasons, including how harsh the consequences would be for any operator who's rash enough to file this sham Form 6 subsequent. An operator filing a fraudulent form would be subject to an order finding violation, but it could also even find itself in criminal trouble because the Oil and Gas Conservation Act at Section 121.2 classifies fraudulent reporting to avoid regulatory compliance as a Class 2 misdemeanor for which the operator can be jailed, fined, or both. Cogcc urges the commission to adopt Rule 205 C3B as it was proposed by staff. My remaining comments are directed toward recommendations made by the City of Aurora and Larimer County. Aurora's response statement states that their LGD will be testifying to the amount of the mitigation fee, and Aurora's pre-hearing statement recommends that the enterprise board increase the amount to $300 per well per year, and regardless of what the operator's average annual per well production volume is. Cogcc hopes that the commission will decline to hear testimony regarding the amount of the fee because the commission, as Chair Robbins was recognizing earlier and spoke to, no longer sets the mitigation fee under Senate Bill 22-198. Any comments about the fee today would be directed to the wrong entity, to this commission instead of the enterprise board. And furthermore, any discussions about fee in Cogcc's view are just woefully premature. By statute, the enterprise board must evaluate the fee based on, quote, current circumstances and reasonably anticipated expenditures from the fund, end quote. It's impossible to divine in June of 2022 what those current circumstances and reasonably anticipated expenditures from the fund will be in the future. Cogcc believes that the amount of the fee will be and should be greatly informed by the annual reports that the director is required to make to the commission and to the enterprise board. And these reports update on the director's progress and gives the most recent, latest concrete numbers about the number of working wells in the state, the amount of funding that's available, and the total amount spent in the previous fiscal year. Consideration of the fee now without this information is premature and not a productive use of the commission's or party's time. Cogcc also does not believe the commission should hear testimony from Aurora or any other party regarding the mechanics of how the fee is assessed. So As I just mentioned, Aurora seeks to have the amount raised, but it also seeks to have it be a flat amount regardless of production volumes. This suggestion is similarly premature, which I'll get to in a second, but it suffers from a further flaw in that the enterprise board does not have authority to change the mechanics of how operators are subject to the fee. Senate Bill 22-198 is very clear that the enterprise board sets the fee amount, but that otherwise the commission sets the rules. That's why we're here today. Subsection 5A of section 132 of the Act, as amended by the bill, explicitly states that operators should pay mitigation fees, quote, in accordance with rules of the commission, end quote. This means that the only entity that can change the architecture of what operators are subject to what fee is the commission. And this commission, in COGA's view, should not consider changing its rules in this rulemaking without first giving its just adopted rules an opportunity to be implemented. The commission concluded just months ago, after hours, if not days, of fierce debate and testimony, that a production-based fee structure was necessary for the fee to be equitable among operators. And the production-based fee is also carried forward in the Senate bill. Aurora offered no justification for why the commission should reverse its position for year 2023 and beyond to adopt a flat fee. And I can guarantee you that if any of the regular stakeholders to Cogcc proceedings knew that there was any chance in this rulemaking that the commission would consider changing the structure of the mitigation fee, I can guarantee you that there would be far more than 12 parties to this rulemaking. This rulemaking is simply not the place to discuss the fee amount or how it's assessed. Instead, pursuant to its notice scope, this rulemaking should be limited to implementing the new bill. Finally, COGA objects to Larimer County's suggestion that mitigation fees may be used to fund general reclamation research. The legislative declaration to Senate Bill 22-198 is clear that the enterprise board is, quote, solely committed to the plugging, reclaiming, and remediating of orphan wells, end quote. The enterprise cash fund must be used for the actual conducting of these activities, and not for general research about how to conduct these activities, which of course are required activities, not just for on orphan wells, but for operators, for any wells. The relationship between reclamation research, which applies to everyone, and the sole purpose of the mitigation fee is funding the actual work of addressing orphan wells is just too tenuous to be supportable. That's it for me. I very much appreciate your consideration of COGA's comments, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bryan, for the comments. Whatever time you have remaining, we will allow for rebuttal. Are there questions for this witness from commissioners? All right, seeing no questions, we will allow you to move off the panel. And Ms. Larson, what is next?
We do have one of our public commenters in the meeting, Michael Hampton, and give me a moment. And actually, I'm no longer seeing him. Ms. Amaro, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he had been here and now he's gone.
I found his number. I will allow him to speak.
Thank you very much. So Mr. Hampton signed up for public comment. He's in the meeting now. We can hear from him and then proceed with Be the Change.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Hampton, we can hear you.
Yes, sir. My name is Michael Hampton, and I'm actually over in on the western slope of Colorado. And I'm not as well informed as the previous speaker, but my opinion is oil and gas does a lot for the economic growth of all the surrounding towns of oil and gas industry. And with the rules and regulations they have now getting stricter and stricter, it's decimating the economy in these oil and gas towns. And so I kind of have to agree with the other lady that some of these rules and regulations for the smaller companies are deterring them from production. So just need to have some deep thought on ways to mitigate the economics for the smaller companies to grow, because on the Western Slope and Grand Junction, oil and gas used to feed a lot of people, and a lot of people are moving away and losing houses and everything else because of the new regulations that's going on. So I'm not sure what else to say. I wasn't very well prepared for this meeting, but I've been in oil and gas for 20 years, and I know they do a lot already on their own to regulate some of this stuff. And they try to do the right thing, and so we just need to think of the laws and regulations, how it's going to affect everybody, because it's pushing the small business out. I think that's about all I got to say, since I'm not so prepared.
Okay, well, thank you for taking time to present to us this morning. We do appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. Chair, we'll move on to Be the Change and Mr. Phil Doe.
Okay, I figured it out. Good morning. As you know, I'm Phil Doe, the Environmental Director for Be the Change Colorado. These constitute my thoughts on this rulemaking. I open by reminding this commission that had you followed or even seriously considered our advice during the recent financial assurance rulemaking, this follow-up rulemaking would be unnecessary, and millions and not billions of dollars in taxpayer money would have been protected from financial risk. Our proposal was quite simple. Each operator had to fully cash bond each well in its ownership with a 10% add-on to establish a trust to cover the closing of abandoned wells and the almost eternal costs of managing these well fields into the future, well after the industry leaves or disappears. We were amenable to fulfilling these obligations with 2 to 3 year installment payments. Indeed, it is our firm belief that the industry must greatly reduce its operations in order to reduce the unavoidable environmental impacts resulting therefrom, and that this must be done soon, or the planet will simply become chemically, environmentally, and societally poisonous to many of its inhabitants. I suppose Commissioner Gonzalez's statement that the industry has better things to do with its money than pay its obligations or liabilities up front held the day on this issue. His reward appears to have been quick in the making, for he's announced he will be returning to the industry from whence he came. But fear not, Governor Polis was at the ready. He's appointed another industry lawyer to take Mr. Gonzalez's place. This is change in name only. It is both seamless and shameful. The law creating this commission, SB 181, says a person with knowledge of industry activity should sit on this board. That could be any number of the thousands of people who live in the fracking fields of Colorado or in the neighborhoods surrounding Suncor. Logically, it could not mean an industry insider whose economic well-being has long been dependent on working for or defending the industry. But that is exactly what we have with the Polis administration. Perhaps the most vexing new subsidy in these proposed rules is the virtual halving of annual orphan well fees to those with stripper wells, those producing, as the proposed rule has it, an average daily per well production less than or equal to 15 BOE or 22 MCFE. The annual fee for fully producing wells in the proposed rule is $225. For strippers, it is $125. The COGCC's insinuation, once again, is these low producers are owned by an army of mom and pop operators out there getting by on a shoestring. This is a fiction, a deception, a damn lie, if you will. These people don't exist. Furthermore, most of the stripper wells are owned by large operators, not mom and pop operators. Some, like Chevron, are raking in billions. Chevron owns almost 7,000 wells in the state, about 4,000 are producing, but over half of these, 2,500, are strippers. The corporation reported earnings of $15.6 billion last year and could quite possibly double that in 2022, given that its reported profits in the first quarter of this year were $6.3 billion. Under your proposed rule, Chevron would receive a newly invented subsidy of about $550,000 annually. Chevron can damn well afford to pay the full $225 annual fee for all 7,000 wells to help close the orphaned wells in the state that members of the industry walked away from and left for the public to clean up. And don't tell us no worries. Chevron is good for it. Their deadbeat past in Ecuador gives the lie to this absurd concoction. The refusal to pay the $9 billion in cleanup costs for damages to the Ecuadorian rainforest is a thing of legend, even for the oil industry. Their recent transfer of played-out wells in Kern County, California, to an underfunded zombie corporation just coming out of bankruptcy shows they haven't changed their belief that whenever possible, somebody else should pay their business costs. Interestingly, this zombie corporation was created by Occidental, another large Colorado operator, to rid itself of its played-out wells in California. Some estimate the risk to Californians may be close to $18 billion for cleanup of these if this corporation were to disappear in the night. Occidental owns about 5,500 wells in the state, almost 80% of which are producing. But here again, over half of the producing wells are strippers that will become eligible for the new $100 per well subsidy established in this rulemaking. They too are reporting revenues in the billions. What are you thinking? The stripper population is the most likely to become orphaned. The history of abandoned wells in this country is incontrovertible on this issue. All operators are riding high in the saddle right now, but Daddy Warbucks days are limited. They must be, or much of the human and animal population of this planet is itself doomed. This is not simply our opinion, but the scientific and social consensus of the impacts of climate warming above 1.5 C. As for the millionaire drillers with stripper wells hollering foul, they too should be aware that the collapse of the civil society into a dog-eat-dog world is the almost certain consequence of their greed and influence peddling. Gated communities will provide no defense against the chaos outside the gates. The maelstrom will be all-consuming, though certainly the poor will suffer first, but it is unlikely, even if the rich will be spared devastating consequence. So how much would it cost the industry annually to pay the $225 fee for each of its roughly 50,000 unplugged wells it owns in the state? Well, it comes to about $11,925,000. But as we know, the actual take would be less than half of that, since there are roughly 27,000 stripper wells in this census, another 10,000 that produce nothing at all. Thus, the real take is more likely to be around 9 million annually. And that's true only if the 10,000 non-producing wells are also assessed the orphan well fee of $125. 8 million is enough money to close about 32 wells annually, assuming an average closing cost of about $250,000. If in fact there are only 600 wells out there, a very dubious assumption, it will take almost 2 decades to close the existing inventory of orphans. It gives us no confidence that the severance tax revenue is will be available for this purpose. Normally, a tax is only a tax if it goes into public office for public purposes. Classically, it is a hidden subsidy if it is collected to reduce the operating costs of the tax. According to a recent IMF study, the annual oil and gas subsidy in this country is over $600 billion, most of it because of negative public health impacts. The fact is that this country's economy is drowning in oil and gas subsidies, yet this commission seems determined to provide them more. Thus, not only does continuing or increasing these subsidies hurt the overall economy, but they hasten the looming climate catastrophe as well. This is the major impact of this commission's actions over the past 3 years, an impact it continues to dismiss except in the most purblind way. I'd like to finish with this observation. I doubt there's a working class person in the state that thinks the oil industry owes them a living or some sort of monthly stipend or subsidy. So why is it that the Polis administration, as represented by this commission, and the oil industry think working class people owe the industry another handout? That constitutes my comments. Thank you. Oh, incidentally, even if a person owned one stripper well, which we don't think that person exists, at current oil prices, they'd be grossing over $500,000 a year. The average income in this state, mean income in this state for a family of 4 is $79,000. Let's get real, folks. You work for the public, act like it.
Thank you for your comments. Does any commissioner have questions? Very good. Seeing none, we will continue forward with, we now will bring on board the city of Aurora.
Good morning. This is Jeffrey Moore with the City of Aurora. And Ms. Larson, I do have one slide to share. So it looks like I'm able to share my screen. I will share that now, and then I will begin.
We can see your slides, Mr. Moore. They're not quite in presentation mode.
Yes, sir. Give me just one moment, and I think I'll be able to start that. All right, very good. Can you see my slides and hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Good morning, Chair Robbins and Commissioners. Thank you for taking time to hear my comments. My name is Jeffrey Moore. I'm the manager of the Oil and Gas Division for the City of Aurora. I apologize for my attire this morning. I'm actually out on a field tour of a drilling site here in Aurora with our Citizens Oil and Gas Advisory Committee, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to share my comments with you this morning. In general, I'm very supportive of the creation of the Enterprise Fund. I think it will add some necessary structure and oversight to the Orphan Well program, and I think it's a very good idea. And I'm supportive of the Orphan Well program itself. Aurora has been the beneficiary of that program. This year, Cogcc plugged one well here in our jurisdiction using funds from the Orphan Well program, which we are very appreciative of. That well still has reclamation and remediation to be performed on it, but the actual downhole plugging is complete. We have only one well remaining, which needs to be added to the Orphan Well list. That was a Painted Pegasus petroleum well, and we are working with the program leadership to see that that well gets added to the list in a timely manner. So we will remain engaged in the Orphan Well program until all our operators, all our orphans are fully plugged and reclaimed, and this program remains very important to our jurisdiction. I'm supportive of the program because plugging wells and reclaiming and remediating sites that were orphaned by former operators is protective of citizens, the environment, and wildlife, and we certainly value each of those groups here in Aurora. I'm also supportive of the industry recommendation that wells that have been properly filed on a Form 6 plugging list should be excluded from the well count and the subsequent payment of an annual fee. This seems to be a very reasonable acknowledgement that any well on a Form 6 is very near the end of its life in plugging, and thus it should not be charged an annual fee. I do want to encourage close alignment between the Enterprise Fund and the annual fee that's collected and the number of wells plugged by Cogcc each year. In my written comments, I discussed an increase in the annual fee amounts. I should have been more clear in my written comments that I do not support the collection of large amounts of cash in the enterprise fund if those funds will not be used readily for plugging of orphan wells. Some parties have suggested that the current rate of plugging orphan wells by Cogcc, which is approximately 50 wells per year in both 2020 and 2021, that the current annual fees are fine because Cogcc cannot make use of additional funds for plugging. However, I would counter that with two thoughts for your consideration. The first is that I believe that Cogcc should be much more aggressive in plugging orphan wells, and especially in reclaiming and remediating orphan sites. If you look at the data on your website, the number of orphan wells is decreasing year on year currently. However, the number of orphan sites is increasing. And I think that a more focus needs to be placed on reclamation and remediation of those sites. At the current rate of approximately 50 wells per year, it will take at least 10 years to plug the wells that are currently on the orphan well list today. Personally, I think that you ought to consider plugging at least 100 wells or perhaps 200 wells per year. Let's get these orphan wells and sites knocked out in a relatively shorter period of time. Secondly, the statute does require that the fee also cover remediation. These expenses could be very large if environmental contamination appears, even if there's groundwater contamination in any of these sites. Because remediation is part of that fee by statute, that is one of my reasons why I think that you need to keep a close eye, and enterprise fund needs to keep a close eye on the annual fee and make adjustments as needed. This concludes my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss these ideas in more detail. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Certainly appreciate you taking time out of a site visit to be able to present to us. And I am looking to my fellow commissioners if anyone has any questions. As with previous panelists, you did a great job. We don't have questions, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now we'll turn to Larimer County.
Good morning. I'm going to share my screen. You can hear me all right? Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you. Waiting for the screen share.
Working on it. Okay, you can see that?
We can.
Excellent. Matt Sura, representing Larimer County in this rulemaking. I want to first thank the staff and all parties for their participation in this quick rulemaking. I want to say at the outset that I was convinced by some of the industry comments on the proposed Rule 205C3B and both in the staff's comment that they are currently behind in reviewing Form 6 subsequent about 1,000 forms. That was not something that I was aware of, and I found that compelling, and we would then therefore withdraw our objections to this language. However, proposed Rule 205C5, we still really have strong concerns about. We feel that this is needlessly limiting the ability of the orphaned well program to be able to expend the mitigation fees as they see fit to achieve the mission and purpose of the Orphaned Well Fund. And any presentation, the first thing you want to do is open with like some quick humor. Opening with reading legislation is probably the exact opposite of that. And I want to apologize ahead of time. But it's important to look at this language, 3460, 132, the powers and duties of the enterprise. It clearly spells out that you do have the authority to hire staff. in consultation with the director of the commission or the director's designee, and that could certainly be Dave Andrews, to employ and supervise individuals, professional consultants and contractors necessary in its judgment to carry out its business purposes. And clearly the business purpose here is to plug and abandon orphan wells and sites. The next is to contract with any public or private entity, including state agencies, such as the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and the Attorney General's Office for related to the conduct and affairs of the enterprise. So let's talk about what this might mean and what scenarios the Enterprise Mitigation Fund and the Orphan Well Program might be faced with in the future. Scenario one, you can probably imagine that this might happen, that the Orphan Well Program is not having success that it would like to in getting sites successfully reclaimed in the Piceance Basin. In fact, we know that this is the case, that both the Orphan Well Fund as well as operators have a lot of difficulty in reclaiming locations in the sandy soils, steep slopes, and arid environment of the Piceance Basin. Well, this is something that could be addressed. Clearly understanding and developing best practices to reclaim well sites would help meet the business purposes of the enterprise, and would help with the Orphan Well Fund, and would help with operators who are also struggling to be able to reclaim these sites and get their bonds back. So this is an example of something that is not neatly fit into plugging and abandoning wells, but does meet the purpose of the business of the enterprise, and therefore should be included. The statute would allow you to do that and to include that. Large bankruptcy leads to a large influx of orphan wells and sites, and you can imagine that doesn't have to be a bankruptcy. They could, any operator that loses their certificate of clearance for any purpose, and all of a sudden there's a number of orphan wells, there is some immediate needs that the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission would have. And those include securing those locations, ensuring that they are safely shut in. That is not plugging and abandoning those wells. That is other work that would have to happen and would have to be ramped up very quickly. Handcuffing the director and the director of the Orphan Well Program to saying that they could only use these funds, strictly for putting cement down hole and reclaiming sites is wrong. It's just, it would be unnecessarily limiting the ability of your staff to address public health, safety, and welfare concerns of the state. Finally, another scenario that you can imagine, and certainly I have seen in my career at working on oil and gas issues with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, an economic downturn leads to the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission needing to reduce staff. The same economic downturn affects the oil and gas industry, leading to additional orphaned wells. If this were to occur and there were cuts across the board in say every agency within the Department of Natural Resources, certainly the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission would want to be able to address the orphan well problem that was created by this economic downturn, and would have the flexibility through this enterprise to be able to hire additional staff immediately, have them supervised by Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission staff. For all practical purposes, they are state employees, but they're funded through the enterprise. This is a list of the enterprises that are currently doing similar things. If you look through this list, you'll see that we've got Parks and Wildlife Commission that is funded with enterprise dollars. There are some state employees that are directly hired through the budgeting process that is approved by the legislature, but there's also employees that are funded through the enterprise. And there's also other lottery and some of these other agencies that I would encourage you to look at and just recognize the flexibility that this enterprise gives you, so long as you don't tie your hands unnecessarily through this language. Again, so what we're proposing is that the director will expend the Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise Cash Fund created by 3460-132 to address orphan wells and sites and other expenditures related to that purpose. And this is taken more or less from the legislation related to a business purpose. You could even simplify it as an alternative. You could just say the director will expend Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise Cash Fund as permitted by statute. Again, that is going to be your limit. This enterprise is a creature of statute. It was created by statute. Why would you want to limit that and allow for them to expend funds that is less than allowed for by the statute? I don't think that you would want to do that. And I think that, again, we'd probably have to come back and clean up this language if any of those scenarios came to effect, or if the enterprise itself, which is a board that is going to be partially made up of sitting commission members and director, but also new people that are going to be appointed, this board may say, why are our hands tied this way? We would like to have the ability to have staff. We think that it's important to have additional staff if we've got an influx of orphaned wells, and we have the ability to consult, and we have the ability to hire third-party contractors, but managing those contracts is something that is probably going to be handled by Dave Andrews and his staff. And I believe that this mitigation fund could be funding those employees as well. So I'd like to keep any other additional time for rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's speak to the time frame first. I believe you may have been out of time, Mr. Sura, but I'm going to look to Ms. Larson, who's our timekeeper.
Sure, you used 8 minutes and 11 seconds, so you were over time.
Okay, but thank you. Appreciate the presentation and the representation on the part of Larimer County. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sura, for your presentation today. I have a question about the statutory language authorizing expenses beyond just the actual physical costs of plugging and abandoning from the Orphan Well program. And the way I read it is that the enterprise board itself is the one that has the authority to issue those expenditures and dictate those expenditures, hire appropriate staff or contractors as necessary, and not the commission itself, nor the director unilaterally, as written in the rule that you cited for this rulemaking. And so I'm curious, if we've got the director, we've got the chair, and we have this other board on the enterprise, and the enterprise can spend money as they see fit for the furtherance of an orphan well program, why is it necessary for us to give additional authority to the director that is currently held just with the enterprise board?
Well, you're absolutely right. So what I'm asking for is that this language that is currently in 205C5 unnecessarily hinders the director's ability to be able to expend Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise Cash Fund for the purposes that they see fit, in consultation with the enterprise board. So the enterprise board certainly can be hiring additional staff, but my understanding is that this enterprise board was not going to be meeting very often. In fact, I've heard in discussions around this legislation that it may be a board that only meets once or twice a year. And so having the flexibility of this money and then authorizing the director on behalf of the enterprise board to be able to expend that as she sees fit, or her delegate, Dave Andrews, sees fit, is going to be really important to allow for this, the flexibility this board needs to address the problems that they see in the Orphan Well program.
No, I appreciate that response, Mr. Sir. I think as I've considered this, and I've read through the pre-hearing statements and the responses and listened to you today, and I don't know that I'm convinced that the enterprise board itself can't handle that responsibility of dictating the direction of funds beyond just, including what the director can in his or her seat in this case on the enterprise board, convince the enterprise board to do as a commissioner and as a board, that they don't have the authority, that they wouldn't otherwise have the authority to take care of these issues that you're concerned about. And I'm just not quite sure that the director and having that in our rules and the commission rules is the appropriate place when it already exists with the enterprise board. So I want to get your answer on that, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts there. I think that I was all captured in your pre-hearing statements and responses and in your testimony today. So thank you. If you want a last word, I'll give it to you. But that's kind of where I'm sitting here.
Well, I appreciate having a last word, and as an attorney, it's hard for me to not, jump into that. I agree. The enterprise board has the authority to do everything that I mentioned to address every one of those scenarios. However, I think that the enterprise board is going to want to work with the staff at the Orphan Well program, as well as the director of the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission, to move money as appropriate. And what we have here in this rule, is something that we discussed, and it's a remnant of the earlier rulemaking last year, is going to unnecessarily hinder or handcuff the director from spending those funds as necessary and as directed by the enterprise. If the enterprise were to direct the director to spend some of those funds for, let's say that they were going to do some reclamation studies, and there was a need to adjust, how those funds were being paid, we're going to have to bring back the enterprise board to be able to make those adjustments, or can the director do that at her own discretion? Well, if we were to take this language out and this limiting language in 205C5, she would have the ability to address those concerns as needed.
Thanks again, Mr. Sir. Appreciate your comments.
Mr. Sir, and I just will sort of tag on to that. I think I was okay with the original language. I think I'm also not in agreement that that the director could use enterprise funds for studies, et cetera. I think it more is along the lines of dealing with orphan wells and locations. But I like your creative solution, at least at first glance, with the language as permitted by statute. I think that's a elegant sort of approach. It defers to the statute, which is what we should be deferring to. It recognizes what the legislature said, and it defers to another day how that might be interpreted by both the director as well as the enterprise board. So I want to thank you for coming up with, at least first glance, something that I think is appropriate. It also removes the language of only to address orphan wells and sites, which really isn't defined. So I'm going to sort of noodle on that, and I just wanted to present that idea to the rest of the world as folks come to testify before us, because I'm kind of inclined to sort of lean that way. So with that, Commissioner Messner had raised his hand, and so I want to recognize him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You actually stole my thunder. I mean, I was going to say the same thing, because I do think, really, you're trying to create a situation where you're not creating any confusion. And I think just citing statute in 205C5 and the allowed uses within statute, it just ties the two boards, the two commissions, I think, together. And it's just clean, because ultimately that's the goal here, is just to be clean. Statute allows for a certain expenditures. We're saying that the director has the ability to utilize enterprise funds based on that statute. The enterprise board ultimately has the responsibility to determine, how that statute gets implemented. To me, that's super clean. So I appreciate you bringing it up, Mr. Sura.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate all the suggestions. And I thought that suggestion was an eloquent one in your suggested language, Mr. Sura. No, I'm not there yet, but in terms of just kind of telegraphing things for the rest of our parties and in preparation for deliberations, I think perhaps something that references the statute, but may include some language, something to the effect of, and as directed by the enterprise board, could really button that up in a smart way that says, hey, the authorities with the enterprise board are recognizing that in our rules. Statute creates that authority. We're citing that here. Kind of that all buttons it up. So I'm not quite there yet, but I think that's something that I'm going to noodle on throughout the rest of the party presentation. Just want to telegraph that for the rest of us here, and for any of the parties that may want to comment on it along the way.
Great. Any further questions for Mr. Sura? All right, seeing none, again, Mr. Sura, excellent job representing your client, and thank you for being with us today. Commissioners, at this time, I'm going to call for a break in the proceedings. I and Ms. Larson have a commitment from 10:30 to 11 that we cannot get out of. So I would call for a break, and then let's return at let's return at like 11:05 to give Ms. Larson and I a chance to finalize that other obligation that we cannot get out of. So with that, and I'm going to have to leave the meeting because I've got to zoom into a different call. But we will return at 11:05, and this can be considered our morning break. Ms. Larson, we are back live. Wanted to double check back to public comment. I don't think I see any of the remaining 3 in the chat or in the room. Do you see anybody?
I'm triple checking. I have not found anyone else. No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, well then we will get back started on docket 220500106, the Orphan Well Mitigation Fee Enterprise Rulemaking. And we have before us API and Mr. Martin.
Good morning, Chair Robbins. Good morning, commissioners. It's a pleasure to see you again, and I'm pretty excited to think that we might actually get lunch today. I want to start by thanking the staff once again for their hard work and their efforts to address the issues that API Colorado raised, as well as those that others raised. I think you have before you a strong, coherent proposal that merits approval. And as proposed today, API supports that proposal, and we urge the Commission to adopt it without change. We appreciate the clarifications offered by the City of Aurora this morning. I don't plan to get into the issue of where fees should be set, since in our view, that's an issue more appropriately addressed to the Enterprise Board and not to this Commission. I also want to say we very much appreciate Larimer County's withdrawal of their opposition to striking the word approved in the rules, so that operators would not be calculating a mitigation fee that includes wells for which a Form 6 subsequent has been filed. So again, we appreciate.
Mr. Martin, you're muted.
Huh. May I ask where I left off, Mr. Chair?
We heard your testimony relevant to the removal of approved by Larimer County, and then you should start from there.
All right, I apologize. I guess I have a rogue computer. Maybe it thought it was time I finished. That's also possible. What I was hoping to say is that we remain confused by Larimer County's other proposal, and I'm going to resort to the statute to try and explain why we think their proposal is confusing and not worthy of adoption today. So the statute says very clearly that the board is charged with setting a mitigation fee, so filling in that blank, if you will. But beyond that, the statute is equally crystal clear that the mitigation fee is to be used for the specific purpose of allowing the enterprise to finance, period, finance plugging, reclamation, and remediation services. Statute goes on to say that the fee is imposed for the specific purpose of allowing the enterprise to finance plugging and abandonment operations. Statute doesn't give the enterprise any power at all to direct the activities of the commission. The commission decides whether to contract for additional rigs to increase the number of wells being plugged and abandoned annually. The commission continues to have the authority, the responsibility for retaining staff and deciding whether or not additional staff should be retained. The enterprise's sole responsibility, stated very clearly multiple times in the statute, is to fund that work, and that's all. So if you look at Colorado Revised Statute 3460 132A, all of this is laid out in clear and direct language. The enterprise collects fees, it funds plugging and abandonment operations, and ensures the cost of all this is borne by industry. So one last note, the enterprise does not, or the statute rather, doesn't give the enterprise the authority to hire people, does give the authority, the enterprise the authority to hire people to carry out its, in this case, the enterprise's business purposes. The enterprise's business purposes. It doesn't authorize the enterprise to fill budget gaps at the commission, to conduct research, or to supplement staff at the commission in the event of a recession. It is limited to hiring staff to fulfill the business purposes of the enterprise. Taken together, at least, it is entirely clear to me and to API what, if anything, Larimer County's proposed language would accomplish. In that light, I'd ask you to reject the language and defer this discussion to rulemaking at the enterprise. And with that, Chair Robbins, commissioners, I'm happy to answer any questions that may arise.
Mr. Martin, what is your opinion about the revised idea from Larimer County's council of removing the any other blah, 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 I forgot exactly what his words were, instead just inserting as allowed by statute?
So one thing, Chair Robbins, I think I need to learn how to do a screenshot on my PC because I don't remember the exact language either. But our bottom line is we're confused about what it is Larimer County's language would accomplish, if anything. And given that confusion, the record is going to reflect confusion about what that language would accomplish. And in the absence of some clarity, we have a hard time recommending its adoption.
So right now the language is the director will expend Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise Cash Fund created by 346132.6, and it says only to address orphan wells and sites. And the suggested language would be to strike only to address orphan wells and sites and insert something along the lines of as allowed by that statute, right?
Yes.
And so, I mean, I supposed that might not be a bad idea because it defers to a later date the director's use of the funds. It removes this only to address capitalized orphan, capitalized wells and sites, which I don't even think is defined. And so if we're just deferring to the statute itself, I sort of thought that was a good idea. But I don't want to put you on the spot, but if API has some thoughts about that, it would be helpful to the commission as we contemplate this.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I think that the financial assurance rules and the statement of basis and purpose that accompanies the financial assurance rules is abundantly clear about what orphan wells are and what remediating an orphan well constitutes. It is not at all clear what the Larimer County language means beyond that. And I think that the language as it's drafted by the staff is clear. The purpose of the enterprise is to fund plugging and abandonment, reclamation and remediation, period. we're struggling today over what Larimer County language means. We will continue to struggle over with it in the future if it's adopted. It's entirely unclear to us.
Okay. Are there further questions? Commissioner Gonzalez?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Martin, for your presentation. Could the enterprise board direct the Cogcc staff or director through a funding mechanism to exercise an expenditure per their direction? And what I'm getting at here is, if the enterprise fund wants to say, hey, we need more information on X in terms of setting our fees, can they say, here at Cogcc, we're directing through potentially a contractor, through potentially, some other avenue, Cogcc to engage and to report back to us on that matter using the enterprise board's funding? And I think what I'm getting at here is the suggestion from Mr. Sura that perhaps there's more to it, and there's more to using these funds that would be required. And I think as contemplated in the enterprise board 22-198 statute, that would be required to plug and abandon orphan wells and well sites more so than just the actual physical operation. So I'm curious, what's your opinion on that authority, using enterprise board funds, directing the Cogcc to be the ones to implement them?
So Commissioner Gonzalez, if I am understanding your question, and if I fail to answer your question, please let me know. But
terrible question, Mr. Martin. Good luck.
My read of the statute is that the enterprise board cannot direct the commission or the commission staff to do anything. They can request information from the staff and from the commission that would be useful in determining the appropriate mitigation fee to be assessed for the ensuing year. The commission chair and the commission director will serve on this new enterprise board and will be available to provide that kind of information. But no, the enterprise can't direct the commission to do anything. Their authority is extremely limited.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I'm going to think about that a little more.
Mr. Martin, I agree with you. I think their authority is limited, and it is to define the fee annually and then to finance the work of the commission in orphan wells. Having said that, I'm still noodling over the concept of putting within our rules that the director's use of the funds is as dictated by statute. I guess that's where I still sort of think maybe that's not a bad idea, as opposed to the quote orphan wells and sites. I don't want to hamstring the director in terms of the use of the funds. I don't want to hamstring the enterprise in terms of the funding of that use. And so, I mean, that's where I'm kind of still sort of noodling. I don't know that's a question as much of a kind of a statement for me.
So Chair Robbins, we're all thinking about this on the fly, but your question prompted me to think that perhaps if you're going to refer to the statute, it is more appropriate to refer to the Oil and Gas Conservation Act statute, because the director has no authority under the enterprise board statute at all. It doesn't expand the director's authority, it doesn't constrain it. It does nothing. So to the extent you're going to cite to the enterprise board statute, that is in fact creating some significant confusion about what it is you're attempting to achieve.
And I think that's a really logical answer. And I think that citing to the Oil and Gas Act makes more sense because it's inclusive of whatever powers the director may have.
Okay.
And so citing to 3460-101 et al., I think is probably the more appropriate citation.
I would agree with you, Chair Robbins.
Good, it was your idea.
And if there are no other questions, may I have a point of personal privilege, Chair Robbins?
Absolutely.
API Colorado wanted to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Commissioner Gonzalez on the occasion of his last hearing and perhaps his last set of questions to thank him profusely for his service over the last few years. It's been at moments a slog and at moments a sense of victory, but we appreciate everything he's done as part of the commission.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the kind words.
You're welcome.
Any further questions, folks? All right, seeing none, thank you again for the presentation and for allowing us to have a quick discussion about some of these issues. I think it was a productive discussion.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Thank you, commissioners. Have a great holiday.
All right. We now will recognize PDC Energy.
Apologies, Mr. Chair. PDC has elected to reserve their time for rebuttal. So we're now on to Evergreen Resources, Rampike, and Magpie.
Very good.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to go a little later in the presentation today. My name is Tricia Fanning. I'm here on behalf of Evergreen Natural Resources, Rampike Resources, and Magpie Operating. Simply put, I'll keep it short. My clients adopt the fabulous words of Miss Julia Ryan and Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I am very happy to see that Mr. Sura, representing Larimer County, has decided to withdraw his objection to the striking of the word approved. I would also like to note, though, that his assertion that operators would potentially submit Form 6s that are inadequate or false is absurd in order to avoid a mitigation fee. And I'm glad that he has changed his mind. With regards to your most recent conversation around Rule 205C5, I don't see the necessity to change the language as stated by staff. I will leave it up to council to state otherwise, but I think it is very clear in its statement that it is direct to what the enterprise board can do. And I would also note, Chairman Robbins, that it is very clear on the definition in the 100 series rules of what an orphan well is in an orphan site. If that clarification is needed for anybody out there, they can refer to the 100 series. With that, I conclude, and I don't know if Council McGowan has anything to add here, but thank you. And also, just as done by Jim Martin, to do it personally and publicly, Commissioner Gonzalez, thank you for your time. I wish you the best on your next venture.
Thank you, Tricia.
So Chairman Robbins, yeah, thank you, Tricia, and thank you, Chairman or Commissioner Gonzalez. You've done a great job, and appreciate all you've done through the Zoom transition. Like, you know, the only thing I wanted to add, Chairman Robbins, is that we are talking about Senate Bill 22-198, and I'll just note in the statute, it is clear the mitigation fee is imposed for the specific purpose of allowing the enterprise to finance plugging, reclaiming, and remediating services. It actually says that twice in the enabling statute, and in section 2, it also notes that created in the department for the purpose of funding the plugging, reclaiming, and remediation of orphan wells in the state. So I would just note that the bill is limited, right? The bill specifically speaks to and uses limiting language in what the fee is designed to do anyway. And I would note that I would agree that I don't think the enterprise fund can direct the Cogcc to do anything. They're wholly separate statutory agencies, but I do know that I would argue the enterprise fund is obligated to follow its statutory mandate and provide those funds for the statutory purpose, which would speak to directly orphan wells and sites, as it says right now in the rules.
Okay, thank you for that testimony. Questions? All right, seeing none, we appreciate the clear direction and we allow you to go away. Ms. Larson, at this point, we've heard from all the parties, is that right?
One slight correction, PDC will actually be presenting. I apologize. So we'll bring Mr. Lepore in.
Okay, and then I believe that COGA had a little time for rebuttal if they desire to use it. Is that right?
That is correct. COGA has time for rebuttal if they wish to use it Mr. Martin, API also has time should they wish to use it. And Mr. Nguyen has indicated that he would like to use some time for rebuttal.
Well, let's finish up case in chief, Mr. Lepore, on behalf of PTC.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you all very much for your efforts here in the rulemaking. As with others, I would like to thank staff for their efforts. And as with others, I will take this opportunity to thank Commissioner Gonzalez for his service to the state these past 2 years, which have been as challenging as any 2 years I can think of in the COGCC's history. So thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, I want to spend just a few minutes. I think I've given away all but 3 minutes of my time. I want to spend those 3 minutes talking on what has clearly become the topic du jour. I think Ms. Fanning just clarified, Chairman Robbins, that orphan site and orphan well are defined terms in the financial assurance rulemaking. So those are there for your reference. I really would like to spend my time on the statement of basis and purpose from the financial assurance rulemaking. And if I can navigate this, I'll share my screen real quickly. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so we're looking at page 30 of 87 of the statement of basis and purpose from the financial assurance rulemaking. I'll introduce this by saying that I think it was quite clear from the beginning of the concept of funding an orphan well fee to the tune of $10 million annually, that those monies would be used to plug and abandon orphan wells and reclaim orphan well sites. So the statement of basis and purpose, in my estimation, reinforces that quite clearly. Rule 205C5, I'm reading the first highlighted line, limits the director's authority to expending funds raised by the annual fee to address orphaned wells and sites. The next line gives an exception to that, if you will, or a clarification that includes providing grants to local governments or other persons to address for reasonable costs incurred to address orphan well sites. The next paragraph is perhaps the most salient one. The new annual registration fee is intended to address the liabilities presented to the state by an operator orphaning wells and sites, the liabilities to the state. The purpose of the annual registration is not to raise general revenue to fund the commission's operations. The commission's operating budget will continue to be funded by the mill levy. All of that seems pretty straightforward to me. I think if you embark down a different road, you are embarking on a slippery slope, and you will spend an awful lot of time deciding what is in and what is out. Finally, I'll just point out that by virtue of the mitigation fee being spent for orphan wells, you will free up something around the ballpark of $3 million annually that is now allocated to orphan wells out of your general fund. That money has been supplanted by this orphan well fee, so you automatically get that money back to spend it how you see fit. I will anticipate your question, Chairman. In my view, adding language that says as allowed by statute is superfluous because that's all you can do. You can't do anything that is not allowed by statute. So, I mean, putting those words in there, if that's a solution in Mr. Sura's mind, I liked Commissioner Gonzalez's suggestion of as allowed by statute and directed by the board, but I think there are, as you've heard from other speakers, clear questions around the scope of that. There is no question that you are limited to what the statute says you can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lepore. He already answered my question. Does anybody else have questions? All right, seeing none, we appreciate your presentation.
Thank you all.
All right, Ms. Larson, do we want to call on Mr. Nguyen or Koga or API? Do you have a preference?
API has indicated they actually will not be using any of their remaining time for rebuttal. We could ask Ms. Ryan and Mr. Nguyen if they do wish to provide any rebuttal to raise their hands, and then we can bring them into the meeting.
Great.
Ms. Ryan,
Who raises their hand first?
Ms. Ryan was first.
Hi, Commissioners and everyone. Thanks again. Just a couple brief comments on rebuttal. As we discussed our direct, COGA does believe that Larimer County's comments about the scope of what the fees can be used for are too broad and before the wrong entity. In this vein, I echo the comments of Mr. Martin, Ms. Fanning, Mr. McGowan, and Mr. Lepore. COGA believes, and the legislation requires, that the enterprise board is a proper body to finance the plugging, reclamation, and abandonment of orphan wells. And it's clear from the language of the bill and other documents that there has to be a nexus between the mitigation fee spending and orphan wells specifically. Again, anticipating your question, you know, COGA is rather agnostic about adding the language because whether the statute is referenced, it's required all of the rules have to be in compliance with statute. And so because it's not really necessary, COGA thinks it shouldn't be included, but at the same time, it's not particularly objectionable because it doesn't change anything or add anything beyond what's already required by statute. So thank you. Just wanted to make those quick comments. And then, of course, COGA would also be remiss if we didn't thank Commissioner Gonzalez for his service over the past 2 years. So thank you very much, Commissioner.
Any questions for this witness? All right. Thank you, Ms. Ryan, for the rebuttal. We appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Nguyen has indicated to me he does not have any further comments on rebuttal.
Okay, and then just one final check in. Did any of our 3 sign up public commenters ever appear that did not testify previously?
I'm looking again. I do not see them at the meeting.
Okay, then that will conclude the stakeholder present or the party status presentations as well as public comment. And I believe we will now turn to commissioner deliberations on docket 2205-00106, the Orphan Well Mitigation Fee Enterprise Rulemaking. Does anyone want to start with regard to deliberations? Commissioner Messner, then Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think generally the rules as proposed by staff make sense. I think it captures the intent of the discussions that we had during the financial assurances rulemaking. I think the removal of the approved Form 6 makes sense. Yeah, I also think that clarification in 205C5 makes sense, referring it to statute. I appreciate the comments that were provided by API and COGA and PDC and others. I mean, I think the statement of basis and purpose does capture what the allowed utilization of the well mitigation fee is allowed to do. I will note that after the highlighted sections from Mr. Lepore on page 30 of 87 of the statement of basis and purpose, it also indicates that the well registration fee can be utilized for reasonably direct and indirect costs of administering the orphan well program. I do think referring to statute makes sense. I do think the clarity between the two, I'm okay with referencing both the SB 22-198 as well as the act in this, just to make it clear, because I do think it's clear and I do think that clarifies it. And I think having any additional language besides those two things, just creates opportunities for argument. And I'm not sure some of the things that Mr. Sura brought up are allowable uses under the act or SB 22-198. And so, but I do think that there's clarity there as far as how that money can be used, and that would be the basis of how we would determine whether we would utilize those funds, and or the enterprise board would determine how to utilize those funds. So I do think that that change is warranted. And I would recommend the language be that the director will expend the Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise Cash Fund created by and allowed for in CRS 346132 and the act. I can't remember what the CRS is for the act, but
3460-101 et al.
that's it. Yep. So that's my suggestions. Interested to hear what other folks think.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Messner, for your suggestions there. You know, I've been thinking about this, and I've read this statute a number of times now, and even a couple times more during the presentations today and on our break. You know, I think that the chairman and a couple of the presenters are correct in that the enterprise board does not give the authority, or the statute does not give the enterprise board authority to direct anything to Cogcc, and really it's just consultation with those entities for the purposes of administering the duties of the enterprise board, right? So when I read that, I can't support the language that I was kind of thinking about or kind of threw out there as a proposal earlier. So I'll pull that back because I think that's inappropriate. I've been thinking about the application of the statute, not just the 22-198, but of the act as well. I thought that Mr. Martin's comment about applying 22-198 to authority for the Cogcc is inappropriate as well, because those authorities are kind of independent of each other, and that the act would be more appropriate. And so, given that, you know, I have a question for anyone who's thinking about it. You know, what part of the act are we putting in there to really effectuate this clarity we're trying to achieve, right? You know, as far as I know, and I haven't read it today, but the act is silent on how the director may use funds for orphan well programs, right? And for administering the remediation and the closure of orphan wells. So I'm not quite sure that adding that language actually makes things more clear, or adds more clarity. And in fact, I think that it may have the possibility to make things less clear, or we've already kind of been through the rigmarole of establishing what the authority is for the use of this fund in our prior rulemaking, and highlighted that through the rules, through the SBP. I'm just not quite sure what reference to statute is going to accomplish in this regard, in terms of what kind of clarity it's going to add. You know, that being said, I feel like that was kind of the main sticking point for all these rules, and it probably my position to just adopt the rules as presented and as amended yesterday evening, this morning. I'm not quite sure what the date is on that, the 29th or the 30th. But those are kind of my thoughts on really what kind of this independent point of debate has been today.
Commissioner Gonzalez, I'll tag off of both of your comments. I appreciate both. I mean, I think that I agree with you, Commissioner Messner, that I think that some of the ideas floated in the hearing statement and rebuttal response from Larimer County are probably beyond the scope of what the director can use the enterprise funds for. But I was intrigued at the idea that perhaps the way that it's drafted right now could be construed, if we left it as is, as a limitation on legitimate use of funds by the director. And so that's where I sort of thought that it was creative and made some sense to refer to the act. And that's just our general, act, because that would not be limiting. And then it would be as to the director on a case-by-case basis as to the use of the funds. So that's where I was coming down in kind of my noodling over, deleting the reference to something specific, oil and gas location, orphan oil and gas location and sites, instead just refer to the act. So that's where I was leaning on that. If it's okay with commissioners, and we can certainly continue to deliberate, but I would like to hear from perhaps our AAG on thoughts about this one topic that we're discussing, because this is kind of a legal question and would love to get some insight. So, AG Davenport, putting you on the spot here.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, my opinion on this particular topic of discussion is essentially the same as stated by Ms. Ryan and Mr. Lepore. I don't think anybody has any question here that the commission is always constrained by the act as to what it can do, and that applies to director and staff as well. I don't think it presents any problems to include language like only as authorized by the act or something like that in the rule. But I also don't think that it really helps or clarifies anything in the sense that we've been discussing today. So I don't have a problem with including it in the rule. But generally, I don't think it adds any additional direction.
Let me ask the converse, AG Davenport. The current draft says only to address capital orphan, capital wells, and sites. Is that language inclusive enough for the director and the use of funds, in your opinion? Or if you deleted that and just said, as allowable by the act, knowing the act is the Oil and Gas Act, which is a defined term, is that more inclusive, or do you have an opinion?
It could be. I mean, trying to consider all different scenarios is an impossibility in this case. It only to address orphan wells and sites could be less inclusive than only as authorized by the act. That's possible. I'd also, just to be clear, the SB 22-198 added those provisions to the act. So when we refer to the act, we are referring to the additions made by SB 22-198. Okay. I'd also note that the act is a defined term already in the commission's rules. So I think simply reference to the act is sufficient should the commission decide to go this route.
So we don't have to define out 3460-101 at all. We can just say the act. And thinking I'm answering a question from Commissioner Messner, that would be inclusive of the most recent enterprise bill, because that's part of the act now, right?
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for that clarification. I'm good with just saying as allowed, created as allowed for by the act, right? So the director will expend the Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise Cash Fund as allowed for by the act. I think that's clear. I think it is defined, and rather than having other language that is going to get argued about, I think that just makes sense to me.
I'm there too. Further thoughts and deliberations from commissioners? Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I ultimately I'm fine with it. I just, kind of working my way back of how it works, right? As allowed by the act. The act creates, the director. The act says the director is going to put rules in place. We put rules in place. The rules govern what the director can do. It kind of works its way all the way back without specific directions coming from the act as it applies to this particular rule. So I don't think it necessarily adds any clarity. But if that's the direction of this commission, I am, I'm comfortable with it. I just don't think it's I just don't necessarily think it's a better result adding that in there. So that's just my 2 cents on it. But I won't stand in the way of a vote if that's where we're going. Should a commissioner put that on motion?
Further thoughts on deliberations? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't disagree with anything that my other commissioners have brought up today, but I do think I would prefer that we refer back to the act, so that just in case we are not limiting ourselves because of words that we put in when there might be examples of other things that could be funded or activities that the director needs to address. So I think I'm supportive of referring back to the act.
Okay, Hearings Manager Larson, if you could elevate yourself and maybe AG Davenport, I'm going to try to summarize where I think we kind of are, is that we would delete from subsection 5 only to address orphan wells and sites and insert as allowable by the act or something along those lines as one edit to the final version that was posted, revised June 30th draft. Number 2, Ms. Larson, I think you began the hearing with a definitional edit that I did not catch. So can you describe that for us?
Certainly, and I can share my screen if that's helpful to show all of these.
Great.
Give me one moment. Let's see, hopefully, are you seeing my screen with the, it leads off with definitions?
Yeah.
Okay. So to your question, Mr. Chair, we had defined in the Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise and in the Enterprise Board, we had a reference to 3460-132. That reference should be to 3460-133. So you'll see we've stricken the 2 and added a 3. So that was the update in the statutory citation. And then scrolling down to the section that we've been discussing here in 205, subsection 5, the language would now read, the director will expend the Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise Cash Fund as permitted by the Act, period.
Very good. And then the approved issue was stricken already, and so it just remained stricken, right?
I apologize. So the approved within subsection 5?
No, the approved Form 6 or whatever it was.
That is correct.
Yes. So that was stricken, and so it just remained stricken.
That is correct. Yes.
So that's not an edit to the June 30th. So we have these 3 edits that we're contemplating.
That is correct.
All right. Any further deliberations? If not, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the rules as presented and modified.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further deliberation or discussion?
Chair.
AG Davenport.
Thank you. I apologize for interrupting. Just to be clear, when Commissioner Messner, you referred to as presented, you're referring to the June 30 draft of the rules presented by staff today.
That's correct, and modified today.
Correct. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of our parties as well as members of the public for participating with us in this rulemaking. I believe that we've come to a good set of rules that will assist the director in terms of use of the orphan well mitigation fee. I think it is the appropriate response to the statute. I want to thank the legislature for following up and providing us with this tool that I think is very important for the state of Colorado as we go forth with this new approach to the funding of our orphan well program. I'm really excited about that. I want to thank Dave Andrews, who runs our program. I think it's one of the best in the nation and that we're doing an excellent job there, and we'll continue to move forward with that. So those are just sort of my conclusory thoughts about that. Does anybody else have anything to say? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries and the orphan well mitigation fee enterprise rulemaking is approved. With that, I believe we have concluded our work for today. As has been the case with a lot of our other parties and stakeholders, I too want to send a hearty thank you to Commissioner Gonzalez. This will be his last hearing with us, Big shoes to fill, Bill. You've done a fantastic job on the part of industry and on the part of the state of Colorado, and we wish you all the best in whatever ventures you're moving on toward.
Really appreciate the kind words, Jeff. Thank you.
Commissioner Messner, Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. And again, Commissioner Gonzalez, my deep felt thank you for participating on this commission. I can't tell you how appreciative I am of being able to work with you, the professionalism that you bring, the insight that you bring, just the knowledge and pragmatism. It's not often that I get an opportunity to work with individuals like yourself, and I do wish you the best on whatever your next endeavor is. Hopefully that's a nice long vacation, and whatever you do, I hope less people yell at you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just echo the thoughts of my fellow commissioners. And I've just been so appreciative of when I feel like I'm really trying to explain something, I feel like you've been the yin to my yang and trying to help me navigate an interpretation of a rule, or if I'm trying to come up with a solution that maybe is a little bit too far, you've got an alternate on the table. And I've just been so appreciative of your thoughtful deliberation and your careful consideration of the rules and how we conduct our business. And, you know, for any folks who have testified as to what they think, you know, your motivation is, I've seen nothing but professionalism and a desire to be professional and do good work to move the mission of this commission forward. And I'm so appreciative of your partnership and the role that you've played in the seat that you have. And I'm going to miss you.
And Chair, I'll add on to that as well. Commissioner Gonzalez, just on behalf of DNR, I want to thank you for your professionalism and your clear commitment to serving the people of Colorado. So I wish you the best of luck, and I'm sure our paths will cross again. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Angela. Yeah, Chair, it's been just an absolute pleasure working with everyone. I cannot think of a better team. Everyone comes in well prepared and thoughtful and willing to have their minds changed, which I think is extremely important. You know, we get into these deliberations trying to get to the right spot. We don't always have the same perspective that we're bringing, but relying on each other as we've done over the last 2 years has really just been a truly special experience for me, and just being surrounded by such great professionals. So to my fellow commissioners, thank you. It has been just a tremendous and fun journey to be on with you guys. I'm going to miss all you guys, and I hope that we can all stay in touch. To everyone else on the call, to COGC staff, thank you so much for really just being there for me in terms of, you know, always helping me distill issues and educate me along the way and sharing your perspective. You guys make this agency tick. You guys make this agency great. And I appreciate all the engagement I've had. To Mimi and Julie and Mike and Greg and Dave and Sabrina and all the managers. Thank you all very much. Your leadership just really makes this agency a really special place with really dedicated folks working here, all working towards a very important objective for this state. Kyle, to you and to the other AGs, thanks a lot. You know, I appreciate always being there to take my phone call and to answer all my questions. You know, they could be off the wall. They could be just kind of, I missed something along the way. Your guidance and input has been tremendous to my ability to do this job. So thank you.
You're here. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.